Hello everyone, it's Silver. This is Knock on the Coffin Lid. You'll have to excuse my voice a little bit, I'm sort of sick, but the show must go on. This is a narratively focused deck builder, by which I mean it is a roguelite deck builder, but it's very heavily based on the story and the characters and has an actual sort of yarn to be spun, a narrative that goes throughout your runs, and a lot of voice acting and cutscenes and stuff too, so there's actually a lot of effort put into the presentation of this game overall to make it more narratively themed. So the idea is pretty cool. Basically, you are a list of 3 different characters, although you can only play as one at first, who have been brought back to life by someone who appears to be kind of a necromancer-y sort of guy, but you weren't just brought back to life, you were also put at the beginning of what's basically a time loop, and when you die, or when you reach the end of the loop, you will go back to being brought back to life, but while still remembering everything. So in effect, you're repeating this day after you've been brought back to life while trying to sort of make everything fall into place just right and actually survive until the end, and deal with this other character that appears at the end that may or may not be trying to thwart the plans of Mortis, the necromancer guy, and you're sort of trying to figure out what's going on, and in fact also a bit about how you died in the first place, because you sort of know how you died, you were poisoned, but the exact circumstances surrounding this poisoning seem to be a little bit mysterious and involve some other characters as well. So you'll go through 3 very large maps. This uses a Slay the Spire-like map where you have different branching paths, each of different nodes that require different things of you, but the maps themselves are huge. They're like big cities, and this is where we gotta talk about the art style of the game, because it's gorgeous. It's very pretty. It's got this sort of medieval art style that's almost a little bit tapestry-like, but is also a little bit graphic novel-esque and is very colorful. All of the node-based maps that you select your path on are actual maps, like hand-drawn, and look super cool, and then each of the individual nodes will have their own art, and the art often moves and has a good amount of atmosphere to it, and in some cases, what you see in the art is actually seen later in encounters and stuff, like you may come across some mosquitoes, giant, like man-eating mosquitoes, and you will actually see some art of a mosquito killing a dude in a boat. And then when you actually get into the fight, you are in that clearing next to the water where the guy in the boat died, so you can actually see him in the background during the fight. All of the little vignettes and cutscenes and all that stuff, and stuff in the background during all these encounters and everything is all really well drawn and beautifully animated, and has a lot of lovely little details, and it's just very dense with just visual detail in general. It looks awesome. And even the cutscenes actually have full voice acting as well. It's quite good voice acting too, in my opinion. All the characters have really good voices, and you'll also find that after some encounters on the map, your character and Mortis will actually discuss something about what just happened, and there are a bunch of these little story vignettes that all have full voice acting as well. And it's just nice to see them in general because they give more context to the world and to the characters' thoughts about what's happening as they're adventuring through. And of course, as you're going through, you are building a deck of various cards that are unique to your character. Also, the game has an equipment system, and the equipment is just as important as your deck of cards because it tends to be quite powerful, and some equipment also adds new cards to you as well. So combat encounters tend to give you a choice between 3 different cards at the end, which is pretty standard for the genre. You'll also find some elite encounters that can give you some equipment or other choices, and things like treasure chests that often have money and equipment in them, and some other encounters and kinds of events that will have various different effects, oftentimes having like multiple choice things that you can do to see what happens. And the cool thing about the maps are, as large as they are, they're actually not randomly generated. They are a set map, and because you're looping this day over and over, once you go through a map and actually find out what some of the question marks are, they stay that way. So on the next run, they'll actually, instead of showing a question mark, they'll actually show what they are, because your character will remember from encountering the last time. I actually really like this idea. I think it's a super cool concept to avoid doing the procedural generation of your maps and instead have them be a specific set adventure that your character can actually learn how to memorize, basically. At the end of each map, there will be a boss encounter, although the exact boss seems to be determined by which area at the end of the map you actually end up at, because there are several different ways to exit the map, and I think each one has its own boss. And also that determines where you start on the next map and what sorts of paths you'll have available to you, so there is a longer form strategy when it comes to choosing your path through the map, because it doesn't only determine your path through that map, but also where you'll start on the next one. And then eventually you'll get to the final boss, and then the final boss after that, which is not currently finished at the time of writing this video, there's some work to be done on the big final boss fight. It's not actually totally ready yet, but it is visually very cool. Combat-wise, the 3 characters you can play actually are, it's not only that they have different decks, but they have completely different mechanics, which is super cool. You unlock an additional character by making it past the final boss of the end and to the final boss. The first character you'll start with is, fittingly, your sort of more basic character that is very versatile, has a lot of different types of builds that he could possibly build up towards, and is just really good at like self-buffs and building armor and stuff like that. He is the character that you're going to play to, if you're most familiar with like other deck builders, he plays like that. And he has an energy system that starts at 3, and he refills it at the beginning of every turn and will spend this energy on cards. And he can get various artifacts that can enhance the energy pool that he's got access to. So he's very versatile because he's got a lot of different card keywords that he could potentially be built to take advantage of, but by default is very good at building armor and sometimes a little bit of evasion. And he can also use one-handed weapons along with shields, as well as two-handed weapons, much larger things that usually have a much more aggressive playstyle. The next character you'll unlock is actually a Lycan. He's an elf that's a werewolf, and he's really fun to use because he's completely different, but also very aggressive. He does not use energy and instead actually pays for his cards with health. He hurts himself in order to use all of his attacks and things, but also has a lot of self-healing capabilities. And whenever he deals damage or takes damage, he gains this thing called a notch, and once he has 5 notches, he'll transform into a werewolf, and at that point, all of his cards cost notches instead of health, but he refills back up to 5 at the end of his turn, which means if you want to, you can choose to stay in werewolf form as long as possible by not using all of your notches. So he could go full on aggression and keep transforming back and forth by using as many cards as possible, or you can try and hold some cards back and be careful about when you transform. He's got a lot of bleed and blight effects, as well as pretty much no armor naturally. It takes a bit of building to get him to be able to use armor, but he does have, as mentioned before, a lot of self-healing and stuff to help offset the damage that he tends to do to himself. Really good at building strength to amplify his own damage, as well as some balm effects, which are like turn-by-turn regeneration, and uses either one-handed weapons, including dual-wielding one-handed weapons, or using these special dual weapons that are unique to him, like claws and stuff like that. He also has this nasty effect where every turn he ends while still in werewolf form, he adds this temporary card to his deck, and if he draws that card, then it adds a permanent negative card that builds a damaging status effect on him whenever you draw it. And because of this, you actually need a lot of card removal for him if you're spending a lot of turns in werewolf form, because you will inevitably start adding a bunch of these cards to your hand if you're not careful, and this is why he actually has a bit of a different selection. When you go to a camp in this game, as the first character, you can do the normal things of either upgrading one of your cards or healing yourself. But if you're the werewolf, you don't have the ability to heal yourself. Instead, you can upgrade one of your cards or remove one of your cards for free. And this is extra valuable because he needs so much more card removal, and otherwise card removal is very, very expensive in this game. So overall, he's a more difficult character to play, but is really fun and has a very aggressive playstyle. The third character is quite unusual. She's an archer that has a pet, and she has 2 different sort of stamina-like resources, one for her and one for her pet. Most of her cards have 2 sides, and on the left side of your hand will be cards for her, and on the right side will be cards for the pet, and each one can be flipped over depending on which side of the hand they're on. And if you ever make it to where you have an odd number of cards in your hand, that means you'll have one card in the very middle, and the card that's in the middle will show both of its sides at once. And if you play that one, then you actually get both sides' effects at the same time, but you have to have both resources to play it. So her playstyle is all about juggling her resources versus her pets and actually making each of yourselves stronger to sort of synergize with each other. And she also gets a different option at camps. Rather than being able to heal, instead, she can either upgrade one of her cards or upgrade her pet with permanent buffs. And of course, she also uses bows as equipment, and she is very difficult to play in my opinion because you have a lot more to keep track of, but really fun because of all the advantages and stuff that you get from having a pet, and also the fact that you just tend to have a lot of these dual-sided cards giving you more options in general. But you've got to be very careful because if your pet dies, it will revive the fight later, I think, but you lose access to all of those pet cards, so you basically gimp yourself and become only able to use like half of your deck. I don't have as much practice with her yet as I have with the other characters, but I definitely want to keep using her because she's just mechanically very fun and unusual. There's also perks to talk about. When you complete a run with a character, win or lose, you will of course level up that character, or at least you'll get some XP for that character. And when you level them up, they'll unlock more of their unique cards to find in their playthroughs. But once you reach level 3 with a character, you also unlock all of their perks, which are like altered versions of them, basically. So when you start a run with a character, you can choose one of their perks, and this will sort of specialize them towards different types of builds, or maybe give them a different weakness than they had previously that you can benefit from with certain pieces of gear, or just a different playstyle in general. These are like playstyle specializations, and they're pretty cool actually, so unlocking them is a big deal. And also for the hunter character, when you unlock her perks, those actually determine what type of pet she starts out with. At first it's a boar, but you can get things like a raven, for instance, which obviously has different capabilities and different cards, and that's how all the perks work for all the characters. It will determine what sorts of specialized capabilities they'll have, what kind of cards they might come across, and also what sorts of builds you might want to build them towards, in combination with the various different types of gear that you'll find and all that stuff. I also really like the little detail, by the way, that all the gear that you have equipped actually shows on your character physically. So their armor and weapons and all that stuff actually shows up, which is cool. There are also some other differences in gear to be aware of too, like different characters can get different kinds of consumables sometimes, and also there are these trophies that you can get from elite enemies and bosses. They'll drop trophies, and you want these because they tend to be very powerful, although some of them do add some negative cards to your deck and stuff as a price, but you can only hold one of these at a time. You can replace one with a new one, but you can't hold them in your inventory, and instead, whenever you get a new trophy, you'll tribute your old one. And this is nice because tributing a trophy gives you 2 card upgrades on the spot. So this is a really mechanically varied deck builder. It's got a lot going for it, and I definitely recommend it in its current state. It's nearing completion, but it's not quite there yet. There's still some balancing to go and still some work on the final encounters and stuff, which by the way are character specific, so there's a lot of variables to look through there. And there's also some voice acting to be added for the third character's story scenes and stuff too later on. But what's currently here is really solid, and I have a lot of faith that it will of course be finished because they've done a lot of work so far in a lot of additions, and they are kind of nearing the home stretch, which is really cool to see. So yeah, a deck builder with a really excellent art style and presentation. It's got this kind of European folklore-ish style mixed in with some cosmic horror in there too. So yeah, I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Knock on the Coffin Lid if you wish to check it out yourselves. Please go and do so. These guys deserve your support. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.